Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 244, Spontaneous Human Combustion. Got a couple people asking about this more recently. My thoughts on it from that occult perspective. Of course, the occult being a search for truth. It's more than just spooky woo, paranormal magic, werewolves and witches sort of stuff. It goes well beyond that. The idea that it's even singularly concerned with magic and witches and stuff is really, it's just part of folklore. Human folklore, legend, and mystery. Science is yet not fully explained. There are multiple things that fit under the header, roughly, of magic or occultism, especially within my own personal practice. What I would say about spontaneous human combustion, it's a mysterious sort of phenomenon. It's never been fully explained. The basic idea is that once in a while somebody seems to burn to a pile of cinders for no apparent cause. That is, that under other circumstances, there's no reason that they would do that. In some cases, you can say that there was an external source of the burning, but you can't quite quantify it. In some cases, it seems you can, and I'll get into a few of the various theories that are behind that. And in some cases, it doesn't look like any exterior source actually was responsible for the human body burning. Now, number one, and I actually read this. It's funny because I was thinking about spontaneous human combustion. Here's a synchronicity for you. I'm getting asked about this by multiple people while I'm actually editing a book that mentions it in brief. It has a brief passage in the Secrets of the Arcane Science, the book that I'm editing right now. There is a brief mention of spontaneous human combustion in the context of the Kundalini, specifically yoga. That is that certain types of yoga designed to enhance the Serpent fire, which is sort of the activation of the chakras. It's an energy force. It's sexual in form in many cases. The idea was that if an untrained initiate were to achieve that sort of state, that physical bliss, it would burn their body to ashes. They wouldn't be able to handle it. Do I believe that by meditating or performing yoga, even in the most strenuous sense, a person can cause their body to spontaneously combust? I haven't seen evidence of that. I've got an open mind. There are certain scientific explanations that could potentially lead a person to combust without an exterior force, yes. And there are certain hypotheses about this. The going hypothesis that's typically used the most about spontaneous human combustion tends to be the wick effect. And what this is that there's an external source, a cigarette, a match, a gas leak, or whatever, causes immolation, and the person's subcutaneous fat begins to seep through their clothing under the right conditions. You've got to have literally the right atmospheric conditions, the right type of clothing, and the person typically would have to have a lot of fat. They'd have to be a fat and fatso. It begins seeping up into the cloth, and it continuously saturates it like the wick of a candle. It's literally the same basic idea, using a wax or oil or whatever. It's pulled up, and it's continuously burned. That is, that the wick itself burns a little. The stuff coming up through the wick is the primary agent. And so the person's fat will literally just continue to cook them, and it'll typically leave behind like the feet and hands, maybe the head, the less fatty parts of the body. The rest of it's reduced to a pile of ashes. This has been demonstrated scientifically to actually work. It has been shown by circumstantial evidence to probably be responsible for at least some human combustions, but not all, because you don't always have immediate evidence of an external source. Another thing is ball lightning. Then this is what I've always believed, is that under certain atmospheric conditions, lightning is capable of creating literally a ball, sort of an undulating energy spike that zips through the air. You see it a lot with volcanic eruptions occasionally during thunderstorms. It appears that they exhibit the ability to occasionally pass through solid objects without discharging electricity, which means that if a person was unfortunate enough to get hit with it, it comes, literally zooms in the window, hits them, yeah, it could immolate them. Its interaction with its surroundings is not fully quantified. It's entirely possible that it would be able to roast a human body. It wouldn't create any apparent external source. It wouldn't necessarily have to, by the way, char the surroundings to any given great degree, other than right next to the body, which would explain, the cinders. Normally, if you're on a wood floor and your body's burning, wick effect or otherwise, there's going to be a black spot left behind where the wood's been charred as well. Well, so too would it be with lightning. This could be responsible for some cases. And then in other cases, it could be murder. in the most literal sense, of course. An external source has used some sort of propellant that's burned off entirely, left no real residue behind. The person's fat, the person's clothes, their meat in general has contributed to the burn. That's possible. And there are various other, there's some chemical, I can't pronounce it, some sort of chemical release that can happen in certain people that have a rare chronic condition that could in theory cause their body to smolder, literally spontaneously combust, but it probably wouldn't cause them to light on fire, which could explain again the absence usually in human spontaneous combustion cases of any damage to the surroundings. If there's any heat damage to the surroundings, it is incommensurate with the idea of a body being completely immolated. This is why the wick effect tends to be favored, because under the wick effect, it's a slow burn over the course of potentially multiple hours. It's just the fat sustaining it, it's bubbling up through the clothes and creating sort of a fiery shroud on top of the body, slowly cooking everything else, but it wouldn't release enough heat generally to cause a house fire or any real damage to anything around. However, there is one problem, and that's that in some of these cases, and I've read, I can't remember the name of the book, it was like Encyclopedia of the Weird or something, back in the 90s when I was a kid. It was in the school library of all things. I think it was a book from like 1990 or something. It was fairly new at the time. One thing that was pointed out was that in some cases, there's no soot release. The problem is that in the tests that they've done, the scientific tests showing the wick effect can happen. They take a ball of fat, wrap it in cloth, light it on fire. Oh, it burns for an hour. It releases a lot of soot. You would think that you would have, therefore, above the body, above the spot of death, a stain. Well, if there's no stain there, there's no soot there, I wouldn't think that it was the wick effect. In some cases, these people appear to be near metal objects. I noticed in one picture that I saw at the time, the person was near some piping. Electricity would be naturally a possibility, or a gas leak of some sort. So there are probably physical explanations in the general sense, but we don't necessarily know what they are, and you do have this sort of tradition, especially the Theosophists talking about the Eastern Tantric tradition, the idea of trying to awaken the serpent fire. They consider it to be physically dangerous. It would be quite interesting if it were possible to formulate a method by which a human body brought under enough mental control could trigger a chemical release of heat in order to destroy themselves. It's possible, I suppose. It's just not particularly likely. I mean, there's that one dude who can make his body withstand freezing conditions by fucking around with his metabolism. There are people that can withstand heat or cold that are abnormal and would normally be highly dangerous, possibly even deadly, simply through breathing exercises and mental awareness. I would think that it's not that much of a leap to suggest that a person could continue that, and if they had enough control over their body's metabolic processes, they unlocked whatever ability to delve into their mind was responsible, they could kill themselves that way. Possibly. I don't know why they would want to, but I suppose it's at least physically, it's feasible. It's another competing hypothesis to the wick effect. Let's put it that way. Somebody should probably alter the entry there and talk about the Kundalini. In the context, at least in a roundabout way, it is technically valid. It has been claimed by multiple people who are interested in the subject. Yeah, by the way, this is one way to cause a body to randomly burst into flames and suddenly turn into a pile of cinders. Very, very interesting. I have been interested in the subject. You know, when you first read about it, sometimes as a little kid, you're like, oh shit, what if I just suddenly go off and die? What if, like, literally second to second, you know, all of a sudden I'm in hell and I look up and I see my scorched body receding from me or something. It can be a little bit frightening at first, but it's sort of like UFO abduction or even like getting hit by lightning or whatever. You got to get past the fear at some point, and then it just becomes an interesting field of study. So yeah, those are some thoughts on human combustion, spontaneous combustion. I've always been somewhat interested in the idea of it. So it's sort of like the idea of like a raining bugs or something, or like frogs stuck in hailstones and shit like that. Very weird stuff happens on this planet. That's about all. Peace out.